friends, if you're like me and you've tried to do anything with any degree of consistency at some point in your life, you may have realized that some days are harder than others, right? So there are some things that we know we should do, some things we need to do, but it's just harder on some days to get into it. We might have even slept well, we might not be tired, but we just don't feel like doing that particular thing. So a notable one is work, right? Not everyone feels like going to work. We're usually driven to do it out of some kind of need for money, or even spending time with coworkers or school. But another one might be exercising regularly. Most of us know we should exercise to some degree, and reading, perhaps. Spending some time catching up, reading books, whether fantasy or nonfiction. These are things that we usually have in the back of our minds, things that we want to do, but we don't always have the drive or motivation to do every day. So I want to share a method that I've used to get me into this and increase my motivation and consistency, but also increase my enjoyment while I'm doing these activities. And I want to share it because I really wish it was taught more. You'll notice that I'll talk about it afterwards because I have a habit of giving the concept and then doing the details, when really I think I'm going to try doing the details and then talking about how the concept encapsulates it. But I wish it was shared more because it really has helped. But after I give the idea of it, you'll see it's a very simple method, a very simple concept. I will give an important few details because as simple as it is, there is not a right or wrong way to use it, but perhaps a better and worse way to use it. There are some ways that can be more targeted for the things you need. And in the theme of a lot of things I do, whether it's the Coffee with Hampton podcast, whether it's the Hybrid Creators channel, whether it's Hybrid Calisthenics, which is my main channel, I have a theme that I consistently say, not even on purpose, but just because it applies to so many things. And that is to start with what we can do, with what we're able to reasonably do competently and safely, and work our way up. So with fitness, if you can't do push-ups yet, you might start with wall push-ups, incline push-ups, knee push-ups, and then full push-ups on the ground. You might increase range of motion. And with getting things done, we'll notice that some things are a little bit more accessible, even on days where we're tired and really unmotivated. There are some days where everything is just a little bit harder, especially if you didn't sleep well. But let's say this is a day where we know we need to get some things done. We have a few things on our to-do list, but we woke up and we stared at our phone for an hour. Something that you might want to try, and something that you naturally do, is you'll notice some things are easier. So you get out of bed, you're like, I don't really feel like going right into writing my novel, writing my screenplay, but I know I can get a glass of water. So we tend to do the things, and this is sometimes called, it's related to procrastinating. We do the things that we know we might need to do, but isn't our biggest priority. And this is usually seen as a flaw, but we can start to use it to our advantage, because getting that glass of water, to be fair, is something that can help you. Drinking water is something that can benefit you and something that you need. So you can start with that. Something a little bit harder than that, though, is we can continue to expand beyond that point. So we can expand and think, I need to start and sit at my computer for a few hours. I don't feel quite ready for that. But I'm just gonna stare at a dot on the wall, a fly on the wall. If you're lucky enough to have a fly in your house on the wall, you can stare at the fly. And you'll notice as you try to focus, your brain will somewhat resist this, especially if you've already looked at your phone and you've distracted yourself with TV, social media, even newspapers and books and things like that. You might have trouble focusing on this, but try your best just to focus. Set a timer if you need to for 30 seconds and focus on a dot on the wall. And like, these principles have shared roots in neuroscience, psychology, things like that, and even like different religions and cultures. But for now, just stare at the dot on the wall. You'll notice that your mind will resist this at first, but eventually it'll become easier and easier. So well done, you've actually gone through a couple stages where you got out of bed, you got a glass of water, and you got to stare at a dot on the wall for 30 seconds. Congratulations. So you can see we're gradually increasing the zone of what we're able to do. After that, it's important to go seamlessly or relatively quickly into the next step. What is something else that you might be able to do? Well, you might be able to, and this is where the other details will come in, you might be able to sit down and write one email that you know you need to write, or one quick email you know you need to answer. Something that already in your mind you know takes only 1 or 2 minutes at max. Go ahead and get that done. If you're not at a stage in your life where you regularly use emails, you might want to respond to a message, or even just message a friend or your parents or your family, or a text. Not a conversation that will take hours and hours, but just a simple message that you've been meaning to send. Something like that. Afterwards, you can go for a walk, maybe for 10 minutes. Afterwards, you'll notice that you continue to expand these things that don't necessarily seem the most appealing will become easier and easier as we work our way up this ladder, as we work our way up this hierarchy of things that are easier to get into, gradually into things that are harder to get into. Because usually what we do instead is we either dive bomb into the thing we know we need to do. So with work, it often feels that way. A lot of times, I think most of us can relate to not wanting to go to work, not wanting to go to school, but we show up anyway and we're like, my gosh, I feel terrible. And then we go into it, and because we usually feel like we have to, that can work. But when it's not something that has immediate consequences, that can be a little bit harder. So we usually just don't do it, and we continue to procrastinate, and then we feel bad about it later. So this is a way we can work our way up. After the 10-minute walk, then you can do some exercise. Then you can sit down and answer more emails. Then you can get to your main project. So you see what we've done. We started with something that we are able to push ourselves a little bit into. It probably was fairly easy eventually to get out of bed. And then we can go get a glass of water, right? It's not something we always feel like doing. Sometimes they say first world problems, but sometimes our bed's so comfortable we don't feel like getting out to get water. Afterwards, it was slightly harder. We didn't necessarily want to, but we were able to, and we felt like we were capable of staring at a dot on the wall for 30 seconds, a minute, however long. Afterwards, it's not the easiest to get into, but now, we can open up our laptop, we could go right into it, flow right into it, write these down ahead of time if you need to, and open an email, or write a couple sentences, or respond to a message. Afterwards, we can walk. Afterwards, we can exercise. But if you have done this to some extent, and by the way, the concept there is to stay in this zone. So I'm kind of in the sun now, and you'll notice this theme applies, this metaphor applies to many things in life, especially ones that are related to growth, progression, or even just adaptation in general. There is an ideal zone, right? So something that is too hard might harm us. Something that is too easy might not trigger an adaptation because it's so close to what we're comfortable with, we don't need to grow. So you can think with weights, with very, very, very light weights, it is hard to grow in strength and muscle and fitness in general. If you want to get into the technicalities, it's still possible, but it's a lot harder. However, if the weight is too heavy, we might not be able to lift it and we might hurt ourselves. So there is an ideal zone, not an ideal weight, but an ideal zone of weights, of resistance, where we can use this to increase our ability, get stronger and get fitter and continue to progress and continue to improve. And this thing applies to many things. In the sun, so too much sun, sunburn. Maybe just enough, could be suntan for some people. But the specifics of that thing I mentioned near the beginning of the video are also very important, because if you've tried this, you may have noticed that we get started, but we get started in the wrong direction. So if you're someone with multiple hobbies, and I want to use two examples that are considered productive, because you could also wake up, get started watching TV, and then you just feel like watching more TV. And that is one example, but I want to show something where you might trick yourself into thinking this is what you want to do. Something you still need to do, but it might not be the priority for that day. So let's say we do follow that list. And you may have noticed this as I was mentioning it from prior experience. If we do follow that list and we wake up, we do the dot thing, we do the water thing, we go for a walk, right? And then we start exercising. You might notice that now you're in the zone to exercise. Now you want to do more. If you've done this very well and you've gone from slow to medium speed and now you're chugging in the gym, you might want to spend a lot more time there. And then next thing you know, it's been an hour, 2 hours, and you've eaten into your time that you've allotted for working on your main thing that day. Let's say it's a manuscript or a screenplay. So fitness is still very important. It's one of the things that we know we need to accommodate and use at some point to some degree in our life. But it may not be always the most important thing of that day. That's how we can get started in the wrong direction. And the other way around too. Perhaps you were supposed to meet your friends and go to the gym, but you got really absorbed into your manuscript, really absorbed into your new book that you're writing, really absorbed into this new art piece that you're making, or music, a song that you're composing. These are all valuable things, but you see, we can get started in the wrong direction. So the key, and what you can do, I'll give some examples maybe in the description. Maybe you can share some ideas, some simple steps you have in the comments. What we can do instead is build a tiered list, a hierarchy maybe, of steps that we can go into. And this is essentially the fact of a warm-up, but it's a warm-up of multiple stages. So if you want to do office work, you might follow some of the steps I already mentioned. You might get the water, do the dot thing. Dot thing can apply to a lot of different things. The dot thing, and then you can write. You answer an email. You answer a couple of emails, not too much. And then you pivot and you start writing a sentence, a paragraph, and take a break if you need to. Then you write a couple more paragraphs. And you can see from this, we are building momentum in the right direction. We're building momentum towards writing. And if our thing is office work, then we can answer a couple of emails. Then we can review yesterday's work or review the work that other people sent you, depending on your role in the office. And then we can get started on our main thing. We don't want to procrastinate it too long, but it's okay to warm ourselves up to this kind of tiered, increasing momentum, increasing difficulty, increasing mental capacity, mental energy. So when we finally go into our main thing, hopefully it didn't take too long, maybe an hour at most, depending on how much time you have, we ease our transition. So as you probably know, sometimes doing the cannonball method works. Sometimes you don't feel like doing it, but you either force yourself or you get someone or something to force you into doing it, and that can work for school and work. But it's also nice because there are probably going to be some days and some scenarios in your life where you have to be accountable to yourself, and that can be a lot harder. It sounds good, and it is good in many ways, but it can be hard to get started. It can be hard to be motivated, even if you are a disciplined individual and you know you need to do it. But what you can do is start small, start with something you're able to do, but just pushes yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone. Not as much as the big, bad, scary thing, but a little bit out of your comfort zone. And staying there will increase your comfort zone. And then you can move on to the next part where this thing is like, wow, this thing was harder compared to what I was doing earlier, which was sleeping. But now I'm able to do this with a little bit of discomfort, but not too much, increasing until you're finally able to get into your main task. Hopefully that doesn't sound too complicated. You do want to do the things that you know you need to do anyway in that list, in that tier, in that hierarchy. It can take as little as a few minutes or up to an hour, depending on you and your scenario and what you need to do. I hope that can help. Have a beautiful day.